We've just got some breaking news in from Buckingham Palace, folks. So this statement has just come in from Buckingham Palace, and I'll read it for you. It goes on to say, His Majesty has today initiated a formal process to remove the style, titles, and
detail was not the punishment itself. It was the reason Charles refused to explain. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Shortly before dawn, senior royals had been summoned to Buckingham Palace without explanation. Some others believed the line of succession, the legal order deciding who inherits the crown. William arrived tense and silent, watching closed doors as the palace held its breath. Charles entered with a red leather folder, marked by the royal seal, the emblem of sovereign authority. He remained standing. He opened the phones while the man beside her refused to meet her eyes. William watched his father sign the page and set down the pen carefully. The future king understood that the monarch was containing something deeper than anger. This was not merely a change in wording. The decree ordered HRH removed from official correspondence, court circulars, the palace's formal record of royal duties, briefing papers, and ceremonial introductions linked to Camilla. 3 letters were being erased from royal life. Then the tension deepened. A second sealed page remained inside the folder. Charles covered it before anyone could read the heading and said the first decree was necessary before the truth can be addressed. Camilla finally turned toward him. Her voice remained quiet, but the hurt beneath it cut through the room. She asked whether he had already decided her future. The king answered without hesitation. Her future, he said, had been determined by a choice she made herself. Camilla rose slowly, pushed back her chair, and walked toward the door without another word. William lowered his eyes to the hidden page as the folder shifted beneath his father's hand. His own name was printed across the top. But before the palace could understand what Charles had taken from Camilla, it had to confront what the title had meant to each of them, and why losing it felt like a public sentence for one woman and a private wound for one king. To the public, Her Royal Highness was a formal style. 3 words printed on invitations, announcements, and ceremonial programs. To Camilla, it represented decades of endurance and the final proof that she had survived rejection. To Charles, it had once been a promise that their marriage would never again be treated as an embarrassment. And to William, it had become a symbol of everything the monarchy had never fully resolved. Camilla sat alone with an old palace program resting across her hands. Her royal style appeared beneath the crest, a reminder of the years she had spent waiting for acceptance from an institution that once kept her at a distance. Her Royal Highness, often shortened to HRH, was a formal way of marking a senior royal's recognized position. Now those words felt less like decoration and more like proof that her suffering had finally been acknowledged. She traced the printed line once, then closed the program when a senior dresser entered carrying new event cards. Camilla looked down and immediately saw the change. The space before her name was empty. She asked whether it was a printing mistake, but the dresser quietly explained that the revised instruction had come directly from the king's office. Her control faltered. The queen consort pushed the cards away, stood too quickly, and demanded to know whether the household had already begun treating her as though she no longer belonged. Charles faced the same wound from the opposite side. Alone in his study, he held the original document that had granted his wife the status he had fought to protect. The paper carried his earlier promise in official form, yet the decree now resting beside it reversed that protection. The monarch understood why it mattered. Removing the title did not only change how Camilla was introduced, it told the family, the household, and the country that her place beside him now had limits. William entered carrying a conflict he could not escape. His loyalty to his mother's memory made the title emotionally difficult, but watching his father suffer made revenge feel dangerous. Catherine spoke with him privately and warned that the monarchy could not heal one old wound by deliberately creating another. She urged the future king to separate justice from humiliation before the family crossed a line it could never repair. Charles finally told his son that the decree was not punishment for the past. It was protection against something approaching in the future. A trusted private secretary then disclosed, through a documented palace briefing, that Camilla had requested access to a restricted constitutional file. Such a file contained rules governing royal authority if the sovereign became temporarily unable to act. William's expression changed as the meaning became clear. This was never about ceremony, rank, or precedence. Camilla had sought information concerning who could make decisions in Charles's name during a national emergency. The title had not been removed because of an old scandal, a public insult, or a marriage finally breaking apart. It had been removed because of one recent moment that transformed private unease into an irreversible royal crisis. Every royal rupture has a moment that later becomes impossible to forget. In this case, it came during a closed succession briefing at Windsor Castle, 3 nights before the emergency decree. The meeting was supposed to be routine. Charles would review contingency papers, William would confirm the next stage of authority, and Camilla would attend only as the king's spouse. Instead, one question from the Queen changed the temperature of the room. Charles had been carrying a punishing schedule, and concern inside the palace was growing. His advisors needed updated contingency arrangements, formal plans explaining who would handle royal duties if the monarch became temporarily unable to act. The meeting mattered because uncertainty at the top could paralyze the household, confuse government communication, and expose deep divisions within the family. William expected nothing more than confirmation of the existing order. Camilla entered believing years beside her husband had earned her a voice whenever his authority became vulnerable. Camilla waited until the final papers were opened. Then she interrupted and asked for a new clause, allowing her to approve major household decisions if Charles became temporarily incapacitated. A clause was a binding written provision placed inside an official document, and this one would have moved her beyond support into direct influence. The king stared at her and asked whether advisors had encouraged the request. She answered that no one had. She believed it came from what she had earned as his wife. William responded carefully, but the warning beneath his words was unmistakable. He said no consort, a sovereign's husband or wife, could gain executive authority simply through emotional closeness to the crown. The prince explained that affection could guide private judgment, but it could never create constitutional power. Camilla accused him of hiding exclusion behind formal language. She insisted he had always viewed her presence as temporary, no matter how long she had stood beside his father. Charles ended the discussion. He refused the clause and ordered the papers closed. Yet the Queen Consort did not let the matter rest. After leaving, she privately instructed a secretary to prepare a draft version of the proposal, despite having no permission to continue. The documented draft reached the king the following morning with a handwritten amendment, arguing that Her Royal Highness status could justify a temporary representative role within the royal household. Charles read the page twice. Then he circled those 3 words in dark ink and shut the file. The title he had granted as protection was now being used as the foundation for power. The monarch summoned William immediately and ordered an emergency decree prepared before Camilla could strengthen the claim any further. Once Charles understood that his own promise had been turned into an argument for authority, the crisis could no longer remain hidden inside documents, and the confrontation waiting behind closed doors became unavoidable. There were no advisors in the room when Charles finally confronted Camilla, no private secretaries, no legal language to soften what had happened, only a husband, a wife, and the decree resting between them. For several seconds, neither spoke. Then Camilla pushed the document across the table and asked the question Charles had feared from the beginning. Was he protecting the crown or abandoning her to preserve his son's future? Charles kept the Buckingham Palace sitting room sealed from everyone else. He had dismissed every aide because procedure could no longer protect either of them from the truth. The decree between them was a direct royal order carrying the sovereign's authority, and its power mattered because it changed how Camilla would be recognized across the monarchy. It also proved that the king was willing to place constitutional limits above the woman he had spent years defending. Camilla placed both hands on the document and reminded him of the promise he once made. She would never again be treated as someone the monarchy could erase whenever her presence became inconvenient. The Queen Consort said the title had been more than ceremony. It had been his public declaration that she belonged beside him. Now he had removed it with the same authority once used to protect her. Charles answered that he had given her dignity, position, and security, but never the right to alter the boundaries surrounding the heir. Those constitutional boundaries were the fixed limits determining who could exercise royal authority and under what conditions. The monarch insisted that William had not demanded the decree. In fact, the prince had warned against humiliating her publicly, fearing the decision would damage his father as deeply as it punished her. Camilla pushed back her chair. She accused the future king of using the succession briefing to force her out of Charles's life piece by piece. Then she demanded that her husband look directly at her and say the title was gone. He raised his eyes. He spoke slowly. His voice held until the final word, then broke beneath its weight. Charles finally disclosed what the private record of the meeting had confirmed. Her unauthorized clause had been circulated to 2 additional officials after he had rejected it. That act transformed a painful disagreement into an attempt to build institutional support without the sovereign's consent. Camilla's anger faded. She admitted she had been terrified that illness would leave him powerless and allow the household to discard her before she could defend herself. Charles understood the fear, but he could not forgive the method. Affection, he told her, could guide a marriage, but it could never become a rival source of command. Camilla walked toward the door and said the crown had finally demanded the one sacrifice he always claimed it would never take, their loyalty to each other. Yet the argument between husband and wife was only the visible wound, because beyond that closed door, a quieter struggle was deciding whether Charles still controlled the monarchy or whether the machinery of succession had already begun moving toward William. A royal decree may carry one signature, but it is never created in isolation. Behind Charles's decision stood constitutional